Talking Trees with Lily and Jad. Welcome to another episode of Talking Trees. Every Wednesday, we dive into the world of practical tree care, current discussions, and the challenges faced by arborists today. In this episode, we will dive into the issue of winter road maintenance, the use of salt, and its impact on the trees growing along our roads. Let's get started.
Ever drive by a highway in spring and see those those sad brown trees just struggling? Like, it makes you wonder what's going on there. Well, today we're doing a deep dive on roadside planting and, honestly, the silent killer.
Yeah.
We've got some fascinating research, actually, for the University of Tennessee, and then a really interesting practical guide from the Rhode Island Department of Transportation.
Oh, cool.
So get ready to get your botany boots on. We're going to uncover a hidden world of environmental impact here.
So it's kind of a story of two sides, right? We need safe roads in the winter, obviously, but using de-icing salts has these consequences that, maybe we don't always see.
Yeah, definitely a tough balance. And the University of Tennessee research, it really gets into the nitty-gritty of the science behind this salt damage.
Yep.
I always thought it was as simple as salt getting on plants, but it's got to be more than that, right?
Oh, yeah. It's way more insidious. You've got sodium, a huge part of road salt, and it just messes with the soil chemistry. And when that happens, it disrupts the balance that trees need to take in water and nutrients. It's like, trying to get a drink from a well that's contaminated. Eventually, it's going to take its toll.
And their visuals from this article really make it hit home.
Yeah.
You see pictures of scorched leaves, stunted growth, and even big old oak trees aren't safe. It kind of reminds you that everything has its limits, I guess.
Totally. And some species get hit harder than others, too. The article actually talked about how evergreens are super vulnerable, especially February, March. They even had this picture of a pine tree totally damaged by salt. Needles were completely brown. Why do you think those months are so bad for them?
Yeah, you'd think they'd be used to it by then, right? They make it through winter, but then spring comes along.
Well, it's a few things. By late winter, those evergreens have been through months of rough conditions. Their needles are exposed, so they're accumulating salt all that time. And then, when the temperatures start to change in early spring, they wake up and they start needing more water and nutrients again.
Oh, so they're sucking up all that salt that's built up in the soil, too.
Exactly. Throws their whole system off balance, and then bam, you see the damage. Think about it this way. Imagine your trees getting hit with a mini saltwater storm every time a car drives by.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's that constant spray, but instead of ocean air, it's way more concentrated.
Exactly.
So what is that doing to them?
Well, that salt coats the leaves, especially on evergreens.
Oh, right.
And it's like, if someone kept dumping salt water on your houseplants, eventually their systems would get overloaded.
Yeah, makes sense.
And for trees, that means browning, needles dropping early. They can't photosynthesize properly.
There's actually a picture in Clatterbuck's paper. It's called marginal leaf burn. Where the edges of the leaves look scorched.
Right.
And it's a sure sign of salt damage.
It is.
So knowing all this, what can people actually DO? Both Clatterbuck and that Rhode Island DOT paper had some good tips.
Yeah, and it starts with smart planting. So when you're selecting trees to plant, think about those salt-tolerant species. Ginkgos, honey locusts, they're the champs.
Yeah, both papers had these lists of super trees.
Of course, if you've already got trees and you're worried about salt, there are things you can do.
Like giving them some armor, right?
Yeah, exactly. Think about it this way. Distance is your friend.
Right.
The further a tree is from the road, the less salt spray it's going to catch.
Makes sense. 60 feet, right? That was the magic number.
Yeah, 60 feet's a good rule of thumb.
Okay. What about irrigation? One of the papers mentioned that, helping after the winter.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a spring detox for your trees. Flushing out all that accumulated salt from the soil can really work wonders.
It's like giving them a nice, refreshing drink.
Yeah. And don't underestimate the power of a good layer of mulch.
Oh, right. Mulch. I usually think of that for weeds.
Yeah, well, it acts as a kind of a protective barrier between the salt and the tree roots.
Interesting. So simple. But
it's a simple step, but it can make a big difference.
Okay, but zooming out a bit here, it's not just about protecting the individual trees.
Right.
That Rhode Island study, they really stress the importance of kind of thinking bigger picture, right?
Exactly.
Sustainable landscaping.
Especially along roadsides, yeah.
Yeah, creating whole ecosystems that are more resilient. It reminds me, they actually did those case studies, right?
They did.
Checking out real-life projects.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those were successes, right?
They were, yeah. And those successes really just highlight how important thoughtful design and planning are.
Yeah.
For example, TF Green Airport. They found that trees planted further from the road and on kind of like slightly higher ground
Okay.
were thriving.
Getting them out of the line of fire.
Exactly.
What about that project on Route 138 in Jamestown?
Oh, that one was fascinating.
Yeah.
They used a mix of native plants that were, well suited to local conditions.
Correct.
And they actually invested in a 3-year maintenance contract to make sure those plants got established.
That's commitment.
It is. And it paid off. The project was considered a huge success, not just for its functionality, but also for how much it, enhanced the beauty of the area.
Oh, wow. That's great. But as you mentioned, not all the projects they studied were quite so successful.
Right, right.
So what went wrong in those cases?
One of the biggest takeaways was that even if you choose, the toughest trees,
Right.
the most salt-tolerant trees,
Mm-hmm.
if they aren't planted correctly or given proper care, especially in those first few years,
Yeah.
they're just more vulnerable.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like sending a soldier into battle with no training.
Yeah, exactly.
So what could have been done differently? I remember the Rhode Island paper mentioned something about a plant's natural habitat.
Right. So they stressed choosing trees and shrubs that were, adapted to similar conditions to those found along roadsides. The Rhode Island paper also talked about how even small details matter, like which way a slope faces.
Oh, interesting. Okay, how does that play into it?
Well, think about it. A south-facing slope gets more direct sunlight, right?
Right.
That means the snow melts faster,
Oh, okay.
which could lead to more salty runoff.
So it all connects.
It's like this whole intricate dance between the sun, the slope, the salt, and then the trees.
We need to think like landscape choreographers. Or something. Speaking of connecting the dots, I was reading about how the Rhode Island study, they really wanted to use a mix of trees, A and D shrubs, in their roadside plantings.
Right.
Why is that?
It's about creating layers.
Go ahead.
So think of your hardiest, most salt-tolerant species as the front line.
Okay.
They're the buffer. They protect the more sensitive plants behind them.
Like a living shield wall.
Exactly. It creates this more resilient, layered ecosystem that can handle those tough conditions.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But we also have to talk about what we're putting down on the roads in the first place.
Right.
Remember we were talking about those alternative de-icing methods?
Yeah.
Like beet juice, like what I put in my smoothies?
The very same. So it turns out if you mix beet juice with road salt, it can actually make the salt more effective at lower temperatures.
So you need less salt overall.
Exactly.
Which means less damage, less runoff.
Potentially, yeah.
Are we talking about beet juice as like a secret weapon?
Well, it's definitely a fascinating area of research, and some places have had good results with it. And since beet juice is biodegradable,
Right.
it could be a win-win.
That's really cool. I'm guessing it can't be as simple as dumping beet juice on all the roads.
Right. There are always trade-offs. Cost, availability, the impact on water systems. It's complicated.
Yeah.
But, that's kind of the point, isn't it? This whole thing with road salt is like this big puzzle.
With pretty high stakes, I'd say.
Yeah.
Our trees, how our communities look, the whole ecosystem.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to, stay informed, ask questions, and just understand how the choices we make all fit into that bigger picture.
Well said. So, from the science of salt damage to those real-world case studies, from beet juice to that essential reminder that it's all connected, that's your deep dive on road salt and trees.
It's amazing what you can learn when you dig in a little deeper.
It really is. Now, here's something to ponder as you go about your day. We've talked a lot about choosing the right trees, right?
Mm-hmm.
To survive those salty roadsides. What if we flipped the script?
How do you mean?
What if those salt-tolerant trees
Right.
could actually help protect other plants?
Oh, interesting.
Like, imagine creating these natural barriers where other plants could thrive, even with all that salt. Food for thought.
Yeah, it really is.
I was really interested in how the University of Tennessee article explained the science behind salt damage.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about the salt itself, is it? It's about how it messes with what's going on inside the plant.
No, it's definitely more than just the salt being there. They talked about how salt makes it hard for plants to absorb water, so they basically get dehydrated even when there's water around. And it can screw up how they take up nutrients, too, so they're practically starving.
Wow, it's rough being a tree sometimes. But I thought it was really interesting how they explained that salt affects different species in different ways. It's not the same for every plant.
Oh, yeah, that's so important to remember. They said that some species are really sensitive to the salt spray, for example, but others are more affected by salt building up in the soil. And even when the salt hits them, can make a difference.
Makes sense, like with those evergreens getting hit hard in late winter, early spring. They're dealing with that salt buildup, and their system is all out of whack because they're waking up.
Exactly. It's just bad timing all around. And that's why knowing all this stuff, these little details, is so important if you want to choose the right plants, put them in the right spot, and make sure they thrive.
So next time you see those trees along the road, you'll know there's a whole lot more going on. Thanks for diving in with us.
That brings us to the end of today's episode, where we explored the impact of road salt on trees and shrubs growing along our roads. Thankfully, through several scientific studies, we've also discussed ways to mitigate this stress, including the use of salt-tolerant species, physical barriers, and alternative de-icing methods. Thank you for joining us in this deep dive into a crucial environmental challenge. Be sure to check the episode description for the full list of sources and citations. Stay tuned for more insights in our upcoming episodes of Talking Trees. Until next time.